that there are 2 additional co-sponsors. And I would now like to give the floor to members of the Council for general comments. Any request for the floor under general comments? I see Latvia. Latvia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. The European Union continues to be concerned about the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, the high level of prisoners of conscience, the arbitrary detentions of individuals peacefully exercising their rights, the alarming level of increasing number of death sentences handed down and executions carried out, including cases that do not meet the threshold of the most serious crimes, and the laws violating the rights of women and girls are serious and deserve the attention of this Council. It is therefore of great value to have a special rapporteur to assist Human Rights Council in fulfilling its mandate, to stay informed and engaged on issues of human rights violations. The European Union welcomes the many attempts by the special rapporteur to establish a dialogue with Iran and the existing interaction with Iran's representatives in Geneva and New York. We urge the government of Iran to extend full cooperation to the special rapporteur, including visits to the country, and to make use of this constructive mechanism. The draft resolution L17 is a short procedural text extending the mandate of the special rapporteur. The draft resolution before us has the support of the European Union, and we invite all members of the Human Rights Council to join consensus around it. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is distinguished delegate from the USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States will again co-sponsor this important resolution on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran and urges all members to support it. As the Special Rapporteur's recent report indicates, there has been no significant improvement in Iran's overall human rights situation during the past year. As a result, the Council should continue its strong support for the resolution to demonstrate its resolve in protecting human rights in Iran. Iran continues to impose and carry out executions contrary to international required protections and fair trial guarantees, including for offenses that do not qualify as the most serious crimes, such as drug trafficking, and reportedly in reliance on forced confessions obtained through torture. Many individuals have been executed in public. Also, contrary to its own laws and constitutions, Iran continues to imprison human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, and reformist political figures. Likewise, the plight of members of Iran's minority communities remain poor. Members of religious and ethnic minorities face legal and institutional discrimination throughout the country. In addition, Iran also continues to deny the Special Rapporteur access to visit the country. The Human Rights Council must continue to stand up for the human rights of the people of Iran. Supporting this year's resolution, which calls for the renewal of the Special Rapporteur's mandate, will send a strong signal in this regard. We hope it will also encourage the Iranian government to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur and the international community to honor the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Iranian people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any other requests for the floor under general comments? That is not the case. Then we shall now hear from the concerned country. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you so much. Mr. President, I'm confident that the distinguished representative present here concur with me that a brief overview of the history and developments leading to the creation and continuation of the mandate of my country provides a plentiful and of concrete evidences to prove that the noble concept of human rights are instrumentally exploited by certain countries to pursue their national interests in a non-constructive manner and to abusing the integrity and procedures of this august body. Mr. President, it is against this background that we believe that the well-advised perspective and approach to address human rights is to respect multicultural universality and engage in a meaningful and sincere cooperation among nations. Within this framework, my country has taken a long-term attitude and genuine measures to safeguard all human rights of its people. Iran's consecutive invitation to the peaceful coexistence and worldwide cooperation, going along with the raising the idea of the dialogue among civilization and personally tabling the resolution entitled War Against Violence and Extremism, so-called WAVE, acknowledged Iran's full-fledged diligence to reinforce the pervasive human discourse all over the world. Mr. President, despite the assumption of the constructive approach of Iranian government towards cooperation and dialogue and major steps taken by President Rouhani government in the field of human rights, raising the draft resolution based on the outdated paradigm of exclusion, as Foreign Minister Zarif recently said here during the high-level segment, is an attempt by those who, quote, managed to creep in, turning the duty to cooperate into propensity to politicize, unquote. In fact, there is a tragic opportunity cost in how the UN human rights mechanism set its priorities and allocate resources in appointing special rapporteurs for Iran with the neglect of the more horrific human rights violation around the globe in countries who are intrinsically allies of the sponsors. Mr. President, it is sad to observe today, once again, that the dignified objectives defined for the Human Rights Council are being targeted by a few countries who do not believe in that the human rights should not be instrumentally exploited for pursuing political agenda, that the universality of human rights does not seek the elimination of the cultural particularities of countries, but rather is looking for the promotion and protection of human rights, including respect for cultural diversity with a view to creating a harmonious multicultural world. That this Council has been established to be an appropriate platform for cooperation and dialogue and not confrontation. Mr. President, Iran, along with its NAM, are truly in belief that the promotion and protection of human rights, if genuinely pursued, should be based on the principle of cooperation and dialogue in all relevant forums, be aimed at strengthening the capacity of member states to comply with their human rights obligations, and should be guided by the principle of universality, non-selectivity, objectivity, and transparency. In the light of the above, Iran reiterates its genuine intention to conduct constructive cooperation with the UN human rights mechanism, including the UPR, HRC, thematic mandate holders, and has continuously reported to relevant treaty bodies and found itself legally bound to implement this international obligation. In conclusion, considering the premise that says us the issue of human rights should not be politicized, but should be discussed seriously and as an objective in the view of the fact that the draft resolution against my country is going along with the partiality, imbalance, and political approach, I hope that the distinguished members of the HRC choose the right path by saying no to this draft resolution. Thank you so much.
I've been informed by the Secretariat that there are PBIs for this draft proposal. Copies of the statement were posted on the extranet. I would now like to give the floor to members of the Council who wish to make explanations of votes before the vote on the draft text. Who is requesting the floor? I see Pakistan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan strongly believes that states have the primary responsibility for the promotion and protection of human rights of their citizens in accordance with their international human rights obligations. Any external interference through country-specific resolutions is counterproductive and against the spirit of constructive engagement and dialogue. We strongly believe that the Universal Periodic Review is a cooperative mechanism which is based on an interactive dialogue and full involvement of the country concerned. Discussing human rights concerns in a non-politicized manner is the best way to attain cooperation and addressing specific concerns. Similarly, treaty bodies play an important role in highlighting the gaps with regard to national efforts to protect and promote human rights. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran constructively participated in its second UPR process in October 2014, and its UPR outcome report was recently adopted by this Council last week. It is indeed encouraging that the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran accepted the majority of the recommendations that would require necessary administrative and legislative measures on the ground for their implementation. We believe that any effort leading away from the objectives of cooperation and equal treatment would further politicize this Council. Mr. President, the best approach to address human rights concerns is that of engagement rather than estrangement. The Council should follow the pursuit of cooperation and dialogue and avoid double standards and politicization. The selective approach in addressing the issue of cooperation by Member States with the Human Rights Council would undermine the principles of non-selectivity and universality. The resolution against the Islamic Republic of Iran is part of a preconceived political agenda and is not in conformity with the constructive and positive spirit of this Council. For all these reasons, Pakistan calls for a vote on this resolution and would vote against it. I thank you, Mr. President.
Next speaker is Cuba. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, sir. The existence of the Rapporteur on Iran is a clear example of the discriminatory, politicized practices of double standards in the country, or in the style of the former Human Rights Commission. Cuba restates its position of principle against country resolutions and selective mandates against nations of the South, which do not contribute to any environment of cooperation and dialogue that is so essential and necessary in the context of the work of the Human Rights Council. In our opinion, human rights are not the real motivation behind Iran's treatment in this Council. We repeat that only through an approach of cooperation and dialogue can this body be effective in its task of promoting and protecting all human rights. And to that end, it is essential that all efforts go hand in hand with the involvement of the country in question. And thus, the UPR is the ideal mechanism to assess the human rights situation in all countries. Mandates that are imposed without consent are doomed to failure, as demonstrated in the recent past. And for this reason, Cuba will vote against the draft resolution L17. May I end by restating our support to the government and people of Iran, encouraging them to continue their work in promoting and protecting all human rights for the entire population, and also the exercise of their right to self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Venezuela. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the underpinnings of L17 do not give rise to genuine dialogue or cooperation. Initiatives such as this undermine the credibility of the Council and jeopardize the democratic nature or background of those promoting it. They promote geopolitical interests. There is no objectivity, and this is illegitimate and inconsistent. It talks about protection of human rights falsely, but is polluted from the outset through manipulation by some powers who insist on using these multilateral fora to pursue their hostile and aggressive policies towards sovereign countries. Venezuela rejects the selective practice pursued by some countries of submitting these draft resolutions that violate the principles of respect for sovereignty and non-interference in domestic affairs of states. Moreover, particularly when the country concerned has not consented, Venezuela is against this draft resolution L17 and will vote against. Thank you.
Next speaker is China. You have the floor.
Mr. President, China has always advocated for constructive dialogue and cooperation to deal with human rights issues. We're against country-specific resolutions which politicizes the issue of human rights. Even this makes use of human rights issues as a geopolitical tool to pursue their own agenda. On the issue of Iran's human rights, China calls upon all parties concerned to phase up to the efforts of the government of Iran and phase up with the progress they have achieved and come back to the path of dialogue, stop the open exercise of pressurizing so as to play a constructive role to maintain the stability of the region and the development of human rights course. The resolution draft L17 runs counter to these above principles. It is not at all constructive. China, therefore, will vote against this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil will abstain when voting the resolution about the situation of the human rights in the Republic of Iran. Brazil understands that Iran's renewed engagement with the human rights system should be acknowledged, particularly the acceptance of most of the recommendations made during the country's participation in the second cycle of the UPR and the invitations to the High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteurs on the right to food and on the right to health to visit Iran. We take this opportunity to express our appreciation for the work developed by the Special Rapporteur Ahmad Shaheed for the last 4 years. We are certain that his contribution has been fundamental to raise awareness about important issues regarding human rights violations in Iran, especially of women, human rights defenders, journalists, religious minorities like the Baha'i, who peacefully exercise internationally recognized rights. The increase in the number of executions in Iran following the application of the death penalty is also an issue that causes particular concern to Brazil. We hope Iran's engagement with the mechanisms of the United Nations human rights system translates into effective measures to promote and protect human rights in the country. During the second cycle of the country's Universal Periodic Review, held last October, the Human Rights Council drew attention to a great number of violations which we expect should be properly addressed by Iran. We truly hope to see even more cooperation from the Iranian government regarding resolutions and initiatives implemented by this Council in the future. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Japan welcomes the Islamic Republic of Iran to have accepted 189 of the 291 recommendations during the last UPR. We, however, recognize many human rights issues remaining in Iran which require further improvement. Whilst the current administration in the 1.5 years in power is coming forward to address human rights issues, the overall progress made so far is not easily observed at present. Japan has periodically held bilateral human rights dialogue with Iran. We, Iran and Japan, just had the 10th said dialogue in Tokyo last December and discussed various issues, including recommendations put forward by member states during the previous UPRs. Japan will continue to engage in dialogue and to cooperate with Iran to encourage their efforts in improving the human rights situation. Japan calls on Iran to work together with the Special Rapporteur, whose mandate be extended by this resolution, if adopted, and to continue its dialogue with the OHCHR and the international community. On these grounds, Japan will vote in favor of this resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any other requests for the floor for explanation of vote before the vote on L17? That seems to be not the case. At the request of the delegation of Pakistan, the Council will now proceed to a recorded vote on draft proposal L17. I ask the Secretariat to open the voting machine, and I request all delegations to register their vote. Please make sure you all register your vote. Please make sure what is reflected on the screen is accurate. Now all votes have been cast and you checked the accuracy. So the voting is now closed. The results of the recorded votes are as follows: 20 yes, 11 no, 16 abstentions. So draft proposal L17 is adopted. Copies of the results of the vote will shortly be distributed.